A winter whiteout in Ontario and Quebec this Sunday night. The onslaught of snow, the treacherous travel conditions.
So we've been here all night.
And what's next in the forecast? The U.S. prepares for peace talks with only Russia. The amplifying demands that Ukraine and Europe be included. The campaign to buy Canadian.
There are things that we just don't grow in Canada.
The challenges for companies and complications for customers. And Saturday Night Live turns
50 years old.
The Canadians who have helped make the show a pop culture cornerstone.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Carolyn Jarvis.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. People in Ontario and Quebec are digging out from the biggest storm of the season, and it's the second major storm just this week. The system moved in Saturday and continued through today with wave after wave of heavy snow and wind. It caused hundreds of flight delays and cancellations and made a mess of roads. Nathaniel Dove begins our coverage in Ontario tonight.
Experiencing whiteout conditions.
A winter storm hitting parts of southern Ontario hard. Nearly 25 centimeters of snow fell in Toronto within 24 hours, on top of the roughly 20 that fell earlier. Visibility at times near zero. The snow slowing down streets and closing parts of Toronto's subway, forcing people onto buses.
On a normal day, you'd be able to see the CN Tower from here. Right now, though, it's tough to see down the block. And this normally busy intersection is relatively empty. Even major Toronto attractions on the Family Day long weekend, like the Royal Ontario Museum and Toronto Zoo, were forced to close. And frustration at the country's biggest airport.
And we tried to get hotels and we couldn't get hotels, and so we've been here all night.
Pearson Airport says airlines delayed around a quarter of departing flights.
We are on track to exceed the total amount of snow accumulation the 7 days that we saw for the entire 2023-2024 winter season.
Not great. We should be on a beach. I don't think I'm getting any money back. It's my daughter's 16th birthday today. So yeah, not great.
The storm's reach widespread, even reaching Ottawa. Those stuck at home, stuck digging out.
This is the third shovel so far, and I mean, it's still coming down. We can't complain. It's Canada, right?
Environment Canada telling Global News only another 3 to 5 centimeters should fall in Toronto, but that the snow still isn't going away.
Temperatures will stay cool enough for it to stay on the ground. There's no doubt about it.
Jean-Philippe Bégin says it's best to stay at home and avoid travel if possible, though you may not have the option. Nathaniel Dove, Global News, Toronto.
In Quebec, the storm is still churning through the province, where there are winter storm and even blizzard warnings in place from Environment Canada. As Dan Spector reports, some areas could see up to 40 centimeters of snow by tomorrow morning.
It's the type of day where just getting from point A to point B tests your resolve, your creativity, your will.
This is terrible. I should stay home.
This feels like a true blizzard.
Montreal had barely begun digging out from under a snowstorm that dropped about 35 centimeters on the city on Thursday when the merciless winter onslaught began falling and falling and falling, often sideways on Sunday. This healthcare worker doing home visits has had herself a week.
About 3 times I had to dig myself out.
I never saw 2 huge snowstorms in only 3 days in a row. That's quite exceptional.
Visibility totally abysmal. Cars buried. Sidewalks totally covered.
Terrible, very impassable.
Montreal Trudeau Airport has seen multiple flight cancellations, although several have managed to arrive and depart with slight delays. Perhaps the most perilous travel method, the highways. Plows are out in full force but struggle to keep up with the rapidly accumulating snow. And the blowing snow has many motorists rolling at a crawl. Provincial police had to shut certain stretches of highway due to bad visibility and crashes.
If you need to go on the road, be patient, be careful.
Crews are pushing the snow aside as much as possible to make roads and sidewalks passable. But officials admit removing the snow might take weeks. They're advising people to hunker down and stay out of the way on Monday.
Work from home, that's going to help the city of Montreal.
Though plenty of people are absolutely miserable as they navigate the mess, others are taking it in stride.
You know, we're hardy, we're Canadian. Snow.
Tomorrow is not a holiday in Quebec, but it seems many people are going to have the day off anyway, with many schools and daycares already declaring snow days. Carolyn.
Dan Spector in a very snowy Montreal. Thank you. Let's bring in our chief meteorologist, Anthony Farnell. Anthony, here in Toronto, it certainly felt like a significant storm. How did it stack up in terms of numbers?
Well, Carolyn, by sheer size, this is the most impactful storm of the winter season so far. In Toronto, it comes as part of a 1-2 punch, and that's really the biggest deal. The fact that so much snow fell, about 25 centimeters late last week, and now this additional 25 to 30 centimeters of snow. There's going to be nowhere to put it rather soon, and the city's going to need a new plan to try and remove the snow once they finish plowing, which I haven't seen yet here on the east side of Toronto. Now, the snow is tapered off, but it is still coming down heavily from Ottawa through Montreal and Quebec City. A rare blizzard warning now in effect for parts of southern Quebec. 30 to 50 centimeters of snow on the way for Atlantic Canada. It's heavy snow up across northern New Brunswick, but the risk of freezing rain, ice pellets, and winds gusting over 90 kilometers per hour for Nova Scotia. And then Newfoundland is next on Monday as well. Carolyn?
Anthony, I know it's only February, but the question for many is, are we done yet?
Well, the weather pattern does calm down some as we go through the upcoming week. But if you're hoping that all this snow is going to melt, well, I've got news for you. The polar vortex is around for the next several days, well below seasonal temperatures. We may not get a thaw until sometime in early March, and that's when the melt will finally begin. Carolyn?
Our chief meteorologist, Anthony Farnell. Thank you. Rescuers in Newfoundland are trying to move a giant cargo ship that ran aground on the province's west coast. It happened near the town of Lark Harbor Saturday morning. Officials say the ship lost power and rough weather and sea conditions sent the vessel adrift before it became stuck in shallow water. All 20 people on board are safe. Authorities are now working to salvage the ship while protecting the marine environment. A powerful storm system which hit the southeastern U.S. has turned deadly. In Kentucky, torrential rain and floods have killed at least 3 people, including a 7-year-old child and their mother. Several neighboring states are also grappling with severe flooding, including Virginia and Tennessee. There were also tornado warnings today in parts of Georgia and South Carolina. Preparations are underway for an intense week of diplomacy after the U.S. confirmed it will hold its first face-to-face talks with Russia in Saudi Arabia this week. An American delegation will fly to Riyadh tonight, but Ukrainian officials say they haven't been invited and won't be sending a delegation. In response, an emergency summit of European and NATO leaders will take place in Paris tomorrow. Vincent McAviney has the latest on a whirlwind few days of diplomacy.
For decades, the Munich Security Conference has been an annual forum for the transatlantic alliance to hold discussions and articulate a unified worldview. But this year's gathering will be remembered instead for the US criticizing not its adversaries, but its European allies, and sowing confusion on its plans for peace in Ukraine. Last night, hours after Marco Rubio assured Melanie Joly and the other G7 foreign ministers that Europe would be involved in talks, the US Special Envoy for the conflict backtracked.
Can you assure this audience that Ukrainians will be at the table and Europeans will be at the table?
The answer to that last question, just as you framed it, the answer is no.
That table initially will be in Saudi Arabia. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was in Israel today ahead of those talks between only the U.S. and Russian officials. But this plan has been roundly rejected by European leaders.
Europe needs to be a part of this process. Ukraine needs to be a part of this process. If not, this type of ceasefire is not going to be credible.
So French President Emmanuel Macron has hastily arranged an emergency summit in Paris on Monday, inviting European, EU and NATO leaders. The message? If Europe is going to have to keep this peace without American support, they will have a say.
We are witnessing tectonic shifts of the order structures and also of the positioning of major powers. The United States really is the big question mark at the moment.
A Kremlin spokesperson has said Russia is keen to speak to the US about peace and not war. Unusually, deciphering Washington's positioning is what's causing more of a headache. Indeed, the US has sent a questionnaire to European governments tonight, asking them what they could contribute towards Ukraine's security and whether they'd be willing to send troops to the country. Meanwhile, President Macron has spoken directly to Saudi Arabian Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, telling him explicitly Europeans must be at the centre of the peace process. Carolyn?
Vincent McAviney in London, thank you. In Moscow, hundreds lined up to lay flowers at the grave of Alexei Navalny today, marking 1 year since his death. The former Russian opposition leader and staunch critic of Russian President Vladimir Putin was arrested and sent to a penal colony north of the Arctic Circle, where he died. Canada issued a joint statement today, along with 17 other Western nations, reiterating that the ultimate responsibility for his death lies with the Russian authorities, and that more than 800 political prisoners remain in Russia, many of whom are tortured and denied proper care. Canada's new so-called fentanyl czar, Kevin Brosseau, is headed to Washington in the coming weeks. His role was created after President Trump claimed massive amounts of fentanyl have entered the U.S. from Canada. But is that true? Heather Urix-West has a reality check for us and a look at where experts say we should be focusing instead.
For the better part of a decade, Canada's fentanyl crisis has been a problem counted in lives, with more than 49,000 Canadians killed since 2016.
Certainly the violence and the opioid and fentanyl crisis that we're facing is a top priority for our teams.
Alert, Alberta's integrated law enforcement response team seized millions of dollars in illicit drugs in the province last year, dismantling 2 drug-producing super labs, like this one found operating outside of Valley View, Alberta.
What could have produced from those labs certainly would saturate our market and probably our neighbors provincially. But the data doesn't tell us that anything is going south of the border.
According to U.S. data, about 19.5 kilograms of drugs was intercepted at the Canada-U.S. border last year, a fraction of the 9,570 kilograms intercepted over the Mexican-U.S. border to the south.
I find it puzzling that the federal government loves talking about how little fentanyl gets detected going into the United States from Canada, when the fact is that we have a substantial overproduction problem.
Christian Luprecht says the bust last fall in Falkland, British Columbia is a good initial clue. Police seized 54 kilograms of fentanyl as they dismantled the largest drug super lab in Canadian history.
This is where you can see the manifestation of Chinese triads, Asian organized crime, and Mexican cartels that have solidly implanted themselves in Canada.
The presence of significant money laundering operations in Canada signals this as well. Last year, TD Bank, one of Canada's largest lenders, pled guilty to criminal charges in the U.S. for allowing 3 money laundering networks to transfer $670 million U.S. dollars.
We have to look at it, in terms of a massive global operation and structure. And part of that structure is housed in Canada. Canadians need to shift it from going what's crossing the border to looking at it more holistically.
Because turning a blind eye, experts warn, will only allow the problem to grow. Heather Urix-West, Global News, Calgary.
The consumer shift to buy Canadian coming up. The nuance in the labeling and how manufacturers are looking to source locally. The increasing tension between Canada and the U.S. is causing a shift in how some people shop. Consumers are increasingly looking to buy Canadian. But that may be easier said than done. Heidi Petrachuk looks at the difficulty in sourcing homegrown ingredients and the rules on how to label a true product of Canada.
When Sheena Russell started her snack bar company 13 years ago, she had one goal.
I mean, the company is literally called Made with Local.
And for her, that means using Canadian ingredients as much as possible, such as Nova Scotia blueberries, organic prairie oats, and Ontario wild honey. A recipe for success other food manufacturers now want to replicate, faced with the threat of U.S. tariffs.
They've been reaching out to me to learn more about what suppliers that we work with, or do I know somebody that knows somebody who can help them source XYZ ingredients within Canada.
But that can be a bit sticky.
There are things that we just don't grow in Canada, or we don't grow in Canada year-round.
To be considered a product of Canada, all or virtually all of the ingredients have to be domestic, with non-Canadian ingredients accounting for less than 2%.
Because of the structure of the market, because of the type of growing season we've had, because of seasonality in Canada, it's much more difficult to do.
Which is why many products say made in Canada instead.
Trying to make sure that as you try and get bigger, you can still be competitive, you can still have competitively priced ingredients.
It took Russell years of sleuthing on her own to source the Canadian ingredients for her bars, and she says now is the time to make it easier for other businesses to do the same.
A supply chain directory would be something that would be really interesting to see at a federal, at a national level for raw materials.
But sometimes there's little choice for domestic alternatives. Possible retaliatory tariffs from Ottawa could make the California almonds used by the Burnaby-based Earth's Own beverage company too expensive. So it's looking to Europe, just in case.
We'll see that to what degree the counter tariffs are applicable. At the moment, all this is gray zone for us. We do not know precisely what's going to get caught.
You have to dig a little bit deeper sometimes.
Back in Windsor, Nova Scotia, Russell remains focused on ingredients close to home, a move she predicts more companies will make. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Windsor, Nova Scotia.
Ahead, what caused a frenzied crush that killed more than a dozen people at a Delhi train station. In Austria, a 14-year-old boy is dead and 5 others are injured after a stabbing attack Saturday. It happened in the southern city of Villach. The suspect is a 23-year-old Syrian man who's now in custody. According to officials, he was radicalized online and is possibly connected to the so-called Islamic State. Police say flags of the extremist group were found in the suspect's apartment. They also say he appears to have acted alone. A crush of people at an overcrowded train station in Delhi has killed at least 18 people. More than a dozen others were injured. Officials say the youngest victim was 7 years old, and all but 4 of the dead are women. Many of the victims were Hindu pilgrims traveling north for a religious festival. Witnesses say an announcement of a change in train platforms caused confused passengers, leading to the deadly crush of people. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwandan-backed rebels advanced on another major city. Smoke was seen billowing from a prison in Bukavu shortly after M23 rebels took control of it. A Congolese army officer told Reuters that government soldiers were fleeing in order to avoid carnage similar to last month in the capital when 3,000 people were killed in fighting. In Italy, Pope Francis was unable to attend this week's Sunday prayer because of bronchitis. He's been receiving treatment at a hospital in Rome since Friday. It's the latest in a series of ailments that has raised questions about the 88-year-old's health. The Vatican says the Pope is in stable condition and that he thanks the healthcare workers who are taking care of him. And that is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Carolyn Jarvis. Tonight's Your Canada is Grassy Lakes near Canmore, Alberta. We love seeing your Canada. Please keep emailing your photos to globalnational@globalnews.ca. Thanks for watching.